Welcome to a special edition of the Lilja and Lou podcast. This is our long-promised report on the late 2013 European tour by Stephen King, where he had stops in France and Germany, and we had coverage in both locations. In France, we had coverage by Jeremy Guerineau, who is the Club Stephen King French website host, and in Germany, we had yours truly, Hans. Take a bow.
Yes, thank you.
Hans was able to go to Germany and catch Mr. King there for a day and a half. So a little setup for this podcast. We did do a group podcast, but unfortunately the audio quality with the three of us just wasn't acceptable. So Jeremy was gracious enough to re-record his answers, and we've taken those and put them into a collection that you will hear. And then after that, Hans will report on the Germany leg of the tour. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hello, and thank you for receiving me. Like I said last time, it's really a nice pleasure to be invited to participate to the podcast, because I always loved podcasts that you did so far, and they are very interesting. And Lilja, I always loved this website, so it's truly a pleasure to be here.
So Jeremy, introduce yourself.
I'm Jeremy. I'm dealing with Club Stephen King, which is a French website. It was, first of all, an organization that was created in 1992 in a university. So it was like a literary cycle where some teachers and some students were talking about Stephen King, his book, his work, and analyzing his books. And I deal with it since about almost a decade, because the founder, at some point, like about a decade ago, basically the founder didn't have time anymore to deal with a website. And I was quite active on his message board, and at some point he decided to give it to me because I was being quite active about sharing what's going on and so on. So he gave me the keys and I completely refunded it. So I deal with it since about a decade now, and voila. So the Club Stephen King, a French website, also available on Facebook at Club Stephen King France and Twitter and so on.
Tell us how you discovered Stephen King and why you like him.
I discovered this work through a friend when I was in primary school, meaning that it was a friend of me that was into this kind of book and this kind of music, and which lended me, first of all, a Night Shift collection, which I loved right away because the short stories are quite inspiring and were quite different from what I was reading at the time. And then he continued with Cujo, I believe, and then Carrie, and then after that, when I was going on summer holidays at my grand's, I was basically picking up a lot of Stephen King books from the library as much as I could, and so on. And beyond that, no, that's not the right word, but aside of that, there was basically the TV, because there was a French channel which was broadcasting like some horror movies on Thursdays evening. And I remember that also at the same time there was like It being broadcasted, and then the Langoliers and so on. So it was quite. I think that the TV did bring another mean. It was another mean of sharing his stories, and that led me to discover more and more. And the reason why I liked his work is basically this fact that his stories were quite different from what I was reading at the time. At the time, I was reading mostly Edgar Allan Poe, Ray Bradbury, or mostly Lovecraft, and the King was something a bit more modern, which was dealing with people which were almost like you and me, and basically I could relate to those stories. So I think that's mostly why I liked him, and that was completely something different from what was on normal TV, let's say, and from what everybody was reading. So I quite liked it for it.
Tell us about your Stephen King website.
So like I said, it's related to an organization that was founded originally in 1992 and that was releasing a fanzine to fans, and that website went online like in 1999. And from me, I deal with it since about a decade because the founder didn't have the time to deal with it anymore. So he gave me the keys and I refunded it, and I deal with it ever since. What is it? Well, it's basically a website like many other King websites, except that it's in French. It's the leading French website. It's the only one that is basically updated on a regularly basis. And as Lilja know, I do really follow closely what's happening in the King community, and his website is really relevant and important for that. But don't only share things that are on Lilja's website. Obviously, one of my main focus, because it's a French website, is obviously all the releases in English, but mostly related to France, because it's dealing with basically a French audience, and not everybody in France read English. So I do a great focus on what's being released in France, being books, movies, anthologies, short stories, and so on. So it's really the main focus on it. And I also share my news on Facebook, French obviously, and Twitter, which is a bit different because I decided for the Twitter account to go in English. Originally I was dealing with it in French, but there wasn't many people in France using Twitter, so I decided at the time to go international with it. And voila, so it's really the leading website in France and in French for Stephen King.
Okay, so Jeremy, why don't you run us through King's itinerary when he came to Paris?
Stephen King visited France between the 11th of November and the 16th of November. It was quite an exhausting week for me, and I guess even more for him, because it was a very, very busy week. There was about 5, 6, or even 7, something like this, appearances in France being related to press or media, or just with fans. It started with press conference. It was supposed to be a European press conference, but there were about 200 journalists from actually all over the world, and King answered to a lot of questions. Obviously, there were questions from Greece, from Brazil, from Norway. There was also a journalist from China, and so on. It was very interesting. It was basically the first time I was actually meeting King, although I didn't meet him as such, but he was in the same room, and it was very busy. I remember one of the PR person said that they didn't remember seeing such a press event for someone basically since the Colin Powell press conference when they decided to go to Iraq or something like this in Paris. So it was very interesting, very intense. Everybody was trying to ask questions, obviously, and well, I tried, but questions were being asked and answered just next to me, in front of me, behind me, but not this time. But later on I would be able to ask questions. I remember a couple of information that were very interesting that he said during this press conference was, for instance, that he would be interested in directing another movie. He said that his experience with Maximum Overdrive, it was awful for numerous reasons, mostly, for instance, because he was drunk and high most of the time, and in the other main reason was also because the team was Italian and nobody were understanding each other, so that obviously didn't help, but that was quite funny. And I personally think that this is kind of a call for studios to contact him for him. Maybe we'll direct an episode of Under the Dome later on. Who knows? Another interesting information was regarding a French TV series, which he said he quite liked. It's called Les Revenants in French, The Returned in English. And after this press conference, he mentioned it a few days ago on Twitter, and obviously all the press agencies and so on took it and said how wonderful the show was and so on. The reason he mentioned it was to an answer to a question which was asking how people were evolving, and if younger people were more and more interested by gory or something like this. And what he said was basically he really loved this show because it's not something gory, but it's actually quite human, and it's related to adult fear, because it's not, to give you some context about the show, it's about a bus of kids that basically have a car accident, so all of them die, and a few years later they just reappear into the family like if nothing happened. And obviously that's a bit scary because, they were dead and what happens, so it's quite a big thriller. So that's pretty much it for the press conference.
Tell us how the book signing went.
Signing took place on the Wednesday. It's interesting to know that the first person that arrived there arrived the day before by 1 o'clock. So he basically was there like 24 hours earlier. And then the following person started by arriving by 4 o'clock. And when I went there, it was 2 a.m. in the morning, obviously the same day. And I wasn't among the very first. I was like roughly the 100th. So a lot of fans were already waiting, and it was quite interesting to just chat about King and other things during the whole night, just standing up or sitting and drinking and discussing. So we didn't really know how many signature King could do and how many people will attend the event, but that was the only European signing, so we were expecting, I guess, quite a lot of people. In the end, the publisher told me that there was about 3,000 and let's say 500 people that attended or tried to get a signature, and there was like 620 people that actually got in to get a signature. So it was quite tense, because obviously it was quite rushed in the way that some people were able to speak with him, but he could only sign one book per person and could chat up a bit, but people were kind of telling you to rush and just leave the building right after. So it was quite interesting. Obviously there was a lot of people disappointed, but I guess that people should have got up a bit earlier, because like I said, I arrived by 2 a.m. in the morning. I was about the 100 person. I was actually number 88. And then most of the people started arriving by 4 or 5 o'clock, and then later on by 8 or 9 o'clock. I think that people that arrived after 8 or 9 o'clock, I would guess that it was already kind of difficult to actually get a signing, because it was already roughly about 600 and was obviously quite intense and quite cosmopolitan, because like I said, it was the only signing event in Europe. And during the night I chatted with some Spanish people, some Polish people, some Scottish, Irish, French, just quite interesting.
So Jeremy, tell us about your personal favorite moments and interactions with Kings during his visit to France.
The following day, the tour continued with a TV program which was broadcasted live on the French channel. It was quite interesting. I was able to go with him to be part of the audience. I think we were about I would say 30 or let's say a maximum of 50% in the audience, although I think it was more like 30. And it was quite quiet, like we weren't able to ask any questions. It was basically a literary person, the host basically, because it was a program called the Big Bookshop, basically. So he was the only person that was asking King any questions. It was quite interesting, but after the show, King continued obviously to discuss a bit with him and signing a couple of books for him. But he told him that he was too serious. He should have chilled a bit more, and I think I felt that during the show, because it was like obviously serious questions, which were mostly interesting, sometimes with mistakes. But I don't know, I guess it's just TV that is obviously serious, because you have especially live TV, because you have like a schedule to keep, and you should not overflow or something like this. It was quite interesting though. But what was even more interesting was the day after. It was a Friday, and King was basically attending a program on the French radio called Le Move. And why was it more interesting? Because it was a radio program to which I was invited to be part of, and with an even more restricted audience. I think we were like 12 people that were invited through a contest, or directly invited by the publisher. This radio program was to talk about The Wind Through the Keyhole that was being released in mass paperback, contrary to the whole tour, which was mostly related to Dr. Sleep, obviously. And the show was supposed to be in two parts. The first hour was supposed to be the host discussing King with us, the 12 people, as well as listening to some reportage, like some kind of presentation and discussing about King. So that was quite interesting. We discussed La Tour Sombre, the Dark Tower, we discussed some questions that we would like to ask King when he would be here. And at some point, we could see that basically King was arriving through the window, and because people were starting to be agitated and so on. So he arrived a bit earlier, and it was a bit the chaos within the radio because the translator wasn't there yet, so we couldn't do much, but basically he got in, say hello to us off radio and chatted a wee bit while waiting for the interpreter. And then the show could actually start because the translator was here, and it was quite impressive for two reasons. First of all, King was absolutely chilled and relaxed. It wasn't like the press conference, for instance, where he was obviously relaxed during those events, but the radio was even more, because the host was sharing with him some good music, some kind of music that he would like, and we could actually see them, and they were actually discussing off air, and I think that they had a good feeling, the two of them discussing the radio. And something which was quite funny and that we don't see often, I guess, is at some point I think that the radio starts playing AC/DC, and we could see King that starts doing some hair drums, so that was quite funny. So yeah, the whole show was basically to talk about to talk mostly about the wind through the keyhole in the Dark Tower. A friend of mine that deals with a French website to the Dark Tower was also invited, and he was able to ask him a few questions and stuff. So really, that's not the best the best memory I've got for the tour, because it would be the day after, but at the time it was really the best memory, because we were actually able to talk to him quietly, there was no rush, we could listen to him quietly as well, and everything was fine. And at the end he signed some books, because he said that he basically said that he had no choice if he wanted to go out, and I think that's kind of true. So during this event, I got 2 books signed. It was the first French edition of Carrie that was published in 1976, as well as a proof copy of Dr. Sleep that I got from the UK. And during the signing, I forgot to say, but the book I got signed was a magazine from 1976, which published an abridged version of Carrie just a few months before the actual French publication. So I got signed some collector's thing, I guess. And the final event took place on the Saturday, 16th of November, which was an evening with King at the Crown Rex, which is a theater place, basically, with a capacity of 2,800 seats. It was definitely the highlight of the week. For me and for many other people, I would say, for 2 reasons. First of all, I was lucky enough because I was able to get invited to the cocktail that took place prior to the event. Cocktail was basically with a bit like the meet and greet to which Lilja attended in Germany, meaning that we were about 60 people that were invited, mostly librarian. It was a cocktail dedicated to librarian and a few extra people that managed to get invited, like me. And it was really a good time, because he came up to everybody in the room, shook his hand, and actually exchanged a few words with every single one of us. So that was really nice. That was the moment where I was able to say that on his website about his work, and his work was really important for me, and so on, and I was able to get some pictures with him. So that was really the highlight of the week. And prior to that, before going to the cocktail, the publisher gave me a wee package in which there was a signed copy, a personalized copy of Dr. Sleep, so that was quite nice. So after this cocktail, which was really a very, very, very nice experience, the evening started. The evening, which is available on YouTube, it was quite entertaining at first. For instance, the beginning, he basically did show that King have a lot of humor, and was kind of how to say that in English, kind of taking the piss of himself, just not taking himself seriously. And voila, the rest of the evening it was mostly questions with a host, then questions with another French writer published by the same publisher. She's a really big giant fan of King, and he did tell him that if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't have written. So his whole literary career, he owes it to Stephen King. So that was quite a big thing for him, obviously, to meet him during this event, but also a few times during the week. Then there was a Q&A session during at the beginning of which I was able to ask a question, because the host of the event, which I met just before the event, told me that the publisher asked him to let me ask the first question. So I was quite happy, feeling like a VIP person, basically. And my question was something like this. It was basically about the collaborations with other authors, asking since he collaborated with Peter Straub for The Talisman and the Black House, Joe Hill for Throttle and In the Tall Grass, and Stewart O'Connor, basically. It was asking what was attracting him in writing with other authors, what was different in the creative process, and if there was any other author with who he would like to work with, dead or alive. Basically, he then explained how he was working basically differently with different other authors, for numerous reasons. For instance, with Peter Straub, the collaboration was quite old for The Talisman, and obviously the internet wasn't that advanced, so they had different ways of working together. He also talked about his collaboration with John Mellencamp on Ghost Brothers, and it was quite very interesting to have that insight.
Anything else about the tour you'd like to mention?
A couple of other things that were interesting from this event was at some point someone asked King if he loved every single one of his characters. Basically said that yes, because he had to live with them for a while, so he cannot really hate them. Although there was one person that he never really understood, which was basically Randall Flagg. And then King asked basically the same question to Maxime Chatham, which is a French writer, and he said that basically he kind of likes the baddies even better than the let's say the main characters of the book, because they can do the most horrible things, and that's quite funny. And King looked at him seriously and was like, "You're a sick puppy." So that was quite an interesting thing that maybe actually the French writer could get as a blurb on his book or something like this. One of the things that struck me the most during this whole week with Stephen King and especially this evening was the work of the interpreter. I mean, I've never really attended any other event like this with foreigner people and foreigner celebs, but I must admit that the interpreter was really doing an amazing job. I mean, I'm sure that King was really impressed with it. I mean, he showed it quite a few times, but really the interpreter was translating sometimes in real time, for instance for the radio program, or sometimes like the Saturday evening, he was waiting that King had finished answering his questions to translate. That's also one of the reasons why you should probably appreciate the YouTube video of the event, because there was an official recording, and because it's not in real time, you can actually listen to it. So that's very interesting, I think. And as well, I mentioned earlier that I asked the first question of the Q&A session, and at first I didn't get it, but when I quickly introduced myself, saying I've got a website about his work and deal with it since 1992 or something like this, he said basically your arc, and I make him repeated it once because I simply didn't hear, because when I said I was dealing with a website, everybody was clapping and cheering at me basically, and I didn't hear King, so it was quite funny. Really a good event and really a unique experience, because for the whole week I felt really like a VIP. I mean, I wouldn't have had that website, I wouldn't have been able to meet and to attend to every single event that King was in Paris. I really want to say thank you to the publisher. I mean, it couldn't have been possible without them, and that's truly unique and truly unique. I mean, Lilja said that he had a similar week a few years ago in London when King was releasing Liz's story. I guess that he can relate to that and understand how it was a unique experience for me.
Sounds like you had a great time, Jeremy. So now a couple of quick questions to find out about your King sensibilities. Your favorite King book?
My favorite King book and why? I think I'll answer to that question in two ways. I always loved King short stories. I think that's one of the things that struck me the most, and I think that's also one one of the stories, a part of his work that I remember the most. The first one I read was Night Shift Collection, Danse Macabre in French. I truly loved it right away. Same with Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I think those are the best short story collections that he ever published, which are obviously quite different from his rest of his work in this way that over the years his work have evolved in a way that was more gory at first, and then it evolved in more like adult fears, in different themes and so on. But Night Shift Collection, I really loved it. I really loved Nightmares and Dreamscape also. In a similar way, one of my favorite novel is definitely Heat. Everybody that have read it can understand why. It's so different. It's so gory. We can so relate to them, to the main characters, and everybody is afraid of clones at some point. This book is really a masterpiece. I cannot say much more than this, to be honest. There's so many scenes that stays in mind. It's really a unique novel. So it's really a masterpiece, and this is probably my favorite novel. After that, The Dark Tower is obviously quite important because it's related to all of his work. Novels or short story, not all obviously, but let's say 75% of it. So it's really important for understanding the rest of his work.
And your least favorite King book?
I think that would be The Cycle of the Werewolf that became Silver Bullet. Simply because it's a short werewolf story, but I don't know how to explain. It's nothing particularly interesting in this book. It's a classical werewolf story, full stop. Even Gerald's Game, I think, was more interesting because we get into the mind of this girl. There are things that are terrific around her. She needs to get out of those handcuffs. Even if we don't really relate to that story, it's quite terrific to try to understand her feeling and to see what she actually does to escape. It's absolutely terrific in the end. So that wouldn't be the least, although that's the one I mentioned the last time. But yeah, The Cycle of a Werewolf was simply just another story, just a basic one, I would say. Just nothing really interesting in this one.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. That's an awesome report. It's great to get a different perspective on Stephen King from another country. So with all of that, any last thoughts?
To conclude this, I would say, first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk about it, and to say that it was really, really a unique experience for me. I really felt privileged by the publisher and for being able to get invited to all of those events and get gifts from the publisher and so on. So that was really, really unique thing. I never really thought that I would actually meet King, even when 2 years ago or something it was first announced that he will be visiting France and then Germany. I guess that they were waiting the release of Doctor Sleep, which is obviously the sequel of Shining, which is a major book and a movie that echoed internationally. So I guess it was the main reason. And the good reason to come to Europe, but then even if it was announced, I never really thought that I would actually meet him and that I would be that much privileged. So really, if you want an insight of all those events and the replays of all the videos or the audio of all those events, you can visit my website at club-stephenking.fr, and I've got a page which is called Stephen King in France, where you've got basically my summaries and comments on all of those events, and I've got the videos and audio for all those events as well. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions or to send me pictures if you were there on my website or on Twitter at Club Stephen King.
Alrighty. How about you, Hans? You had the German leg of the tour, right?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't there personally I was in Germany for about 1.5 days. So I wasn't there for the entire thing, but I tried to cover it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And actually started with King doing Little Unknown visit to troops in Germany.
Right. That was on the 18th, right? At
yeah.
Ramstein Air Base?
Yeah. And it looks like he had a good time talking to them. And I think he did the reading and stuff. So, and that wasn't an event that was open to the public, as far as I know. It was just the soldiers that were there and their closest. It wasn't announced, as far as I know, either, that it would happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were there on the 19th, I guess, for the day?
No, actually, I was there on 20th.
Oh, okay.
On the 19th, King was in Munich, where he did a reading and had a meet and greet for about 30 people who were invited or had won tickets to the event. And that night, the reading was held in a circus.
Cool.
So and from what I've seen and the people I talked to, it was a really great place to keep the event. It was rather small and intimate, and it looks beautiful. So it was a great place to hold the event. I'm not sure how many there were actually the entire place, but I would guess maybe 1,000, somewhere like that, 1,500 maybe.
Okay.
And then the day after, he did a press conference in Germany, which from the pictures also looks a lot smaller than the one in France. It looks almost like a classroom with like maybe 20 people or something like that. So I don't know if it was that small or if it's the pictures that just show a very few people, but it looks like a much smaller event than the press conference in Paris. And then on the 20th, he was in Hamburg, and that was the event that I attended. And I got invited to the meet and greet before the event.
Cool.
We were basically about 35 people maybe, who were led behind the scene to meet with King. And we were told that we could have one book signed. And when King came out, he was a little bit late. So the first thing he said was that he wouldn't personalize any books.
Right.
That he would just sign his name to be able to sign books for everyone who were there. And well, the first thing he did was walking around and shaking everybody's hand, and that was a quite relaxed event. Well, he was joking, and some girls got hugs and screamed like they met a rock star, and so it was nice and a bit surreal, I must admit.
Did he remember you from the previous time that you've met?
No, he didn't mention anything about me. That recognized me, and there really wasn't much time to talk to him because he stood at the table and signed the books, and everybody had their photo taken with him. And I mean, we were like, say, 35 people who I think there was somewhere between 20-25 minutes total, and everybody should get their book signed and their photos. I mean, you didn't get much time in there, so it was basically like a more or less private signing where you came up, you had your book signed, and you had your photo taken with him, and I shook his hand and thanked him. But I don't think he remembered me. I mean, when I met him in London was 2006, and I don't even want to dare guess how many people he's met since then.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and he doesn't strike me as the person who Googles himself either. So.
I'm curious why you picked Swedish Dark Tower 7 for him to sign out of all the books that you have.
Yeah, well, I had a hard time deciding what book I wanted to have signed because basically I ended up getting a German Dr. Sleep and a Swedish Dark Tower 7. I got those two signed, and basically what I wanted was the German book signed because I think that's the best memory because it was in Germany. It was the Dr. Sleep tour, and so I mean it was the same thing when I was in London when he was promoting Lee's Historia. I got Lee's History, the British edition, signed. So I think those it felt mostly like the right book to sign, and then I thought also that a Swedish book would be fun to have signed because I mean. I don't know how many Swedish book he signs, but I bet it's a lot less than US books. So
sure. Yeah.
And the Dark Tower is a favorite, so I brought that one as well.
I'm just curious, Hans, the other people in the room that were there for the meet and greet, did you know any of them?
I know some of them, most of them only by email.
Are they just fans, or do they run sites too, or?
No, they are. I don't think there were anyone running bigger sites. Most of them were people. There were some fans who run German sites. I think it's StephenKing.dk. Yeah. So I met them and met the people who won the tickets from my site.
Oh, okay.
I had, yeah, so that was
cool.
fun. They were very happy.
I bet.
Yeah, but I met a lot of fans, and it was, I mean, the main fun thing was to meet King, of course. But I mean,
right.
it's very fun to meet people who have traveled from different parts of the world or just from the same city, but we were all there because we loved Stephen King's books, and
Right.
and it was almost just as fun to meet everybody and talk
Sure.
about Stephen King, and so it was a great event.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great time when you get a bunch of like-minded people together.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else?
Yeah, well, some things that I got to think about during all this European visit is one thing that surprised me was that he was only doing one signing, and I actually feel pretty sorry for all the German fans who didn't get books signed. The best they could do was at 2 readings he did. There were like 400 books, I think, for each event signed, and they were you got a wristband when you got your ticket, and it was fastened with a white plastic thing. And if you happen to get a gray plastic thing, you got the opportunity to buy one of those signed books.
Yeah.
I got a white one, so I didn't get a chance to buy one. But I mean, at the reading that I was, there were like, I think 3,500 fans or something like that. And 400 of them got a chance to buy a signed book. So, I mean, I was surprised that he didn't do a signing in either of the cities when he was in Germany.
Yeah, well, he's not a spring chicken anymore.
No, I agree. And I mean, it must be boring to sign your name so many times.
Oh, God, yes.
But I mean, he do signings in the States, and I mean, it's so seldom he comes to Europe. So, and another thing that struck me was that even though we got some news, but there were very little new things that we didn't know that came out. I mean, I was hoping he would talk about Mr. Mercedes or the other book. I thought he would talk about them. He has a short story coming out now in Book from Cemetery Dance, and so on and so on. I thought he would mention something more of upcoming stuff.
Well, I mean, the guy's been pretty busy the last couple of years.
Yeah.
He's got 2 books. He's got 2 books in the can, and what else do you want him to do? He's got a short story coming out. I mean, and the guy's 66 years old too. I mean, we've been awfully lucky these last couple of years. I think his output has been fantastic. So
exactly. He did mention one thing that I really enjoyed in the reading he did in Hamburg, and that was actually an idea for a new story that he got while driving around in the Paris traffic. And he compared the traffic. I mean, he said that the traffic in New York is extreme, but compared to the traffic in Paris, it's like driving in the countryside. Yep. So I can imagine what the traffic is there. But anyway, he mentioned that he got thinking that when he pulled up beside another car and he looked into that car and realized that the person in the other car didn't have a clue that he was watching them, and that there were a totally different world in that car than in his car, and it was just like 4 feet away from him. And then he asked everyone if they want to hear an idea he had, and of course everybody was yelling yes. I don't think anybody was going no.
No.
Yeah.
Of course not.
So he told about this guy coming in from LaGuardia airport, and his flight was late, and his luggage was late and everything. And he gets in a cab, and while driving in the traffic, he gets to a traffic light, and he stops beside another car. And while he sits there, he sees a woman and a man in the other car. And then he sees the man pulling out a razor from his pocket and slitting the woman's throat. And then he says, "Well, what does that guy do now? I don't know." So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
it's just like we were talking about with Dr. Sleep. Like he came up with that idea for trailer people, probably from driving to Florida from Maine. It's just he takes everyday things and puts this weird spin on them. So
yep. But overall, I think it was a great tour. And as I said, I left Sweden 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, and I was home about 7 o'clock the evening the day after. So it was a short trip to Germany, but it was great. And
that sounds so weird. Living where I am, to make a trip to another country usually is a big deal, right?
You guys just hop exactly.
Around. Yeah. You guys just hop around as like going from one city to the next.
Yeah, I didn't even have any luggage to check in. I just had a little hand baggage. So, but what struck me the most was that King is such a natural when it comes to speaking in front of people.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
It's just like he just goes out there and do it. And I mean, at the same at the meet and greet, he just walked out to people, and he was friendly and relaxed, and it's like he does this every day. So I mean, he's a true natural at this, and it's a great thing to experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had the same experience when I saw him in Toronto. He's just very down to earth, very natural. It doesn't seem scripted in any way. It's all very spontaneous what he's doing. I think it is. And he basically wears the same clothes, like a jeans, a t-shirt, and a pair of boots.
Yeah, yeah. I actually got the comment. I put on my website. I used to have a picture of when I met him in London in 2006. And now, since I met him again, I put both pictures up beside each other.
Yeah, I saw that.
And there was someone commenting that, "Oh, King has the same shirt," and it actually looked quite a bit like the same shirt. So, but it wasn't. It wasn't. I mean, I remember when I was in London in 2006, and I spent like 5 days there, and I went to, I think, 3 signing, 1 press conference, 1 party, and 1 reading, and it was totally crazy, but it was a fun week, and it's something that I think I will never experience again. So we are lucky to have experienced this.
Okay, so I think that's everything then?
Yep.
All right, so Jeremy, we want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and see you later.
So gang, that's our European tour 2013 King Reports. Check out the article with the podcast for all the links from the interviews that Jeremy and Hans attended. And our next regular Stephen King podcast will be out in 2 weeks. And for that podcast, Hans, what are we covering?
It's a new year, and we have a lot of news to bring to you. And we are also going to talk about the last 3 episodes of Haven. So if you haven't seen those, check them out first and listen to what we have to say. That and more is coming up. And until then,
Stay safe, but stay scared.